Hello, everybody. Welcome to Geek Impulse. We have the pleasure and honor today to be with a legendary professor, Michael Dennin.
hmm
Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is exciting.
Awesome. So today we're going to sit down. We're just going to talk about a few things that you're into, and also talk about some geeky topics.
Perfect.
Aside from physics, get into some comic book stuff, and just get your opinion on a lot of different things that are going on right now.
Okay, sounds
Okay.
good.
So my first question is, and this is regards to one of your books, is how did divine science, finding reason at the heart of faith, if I said that
Yes, you
correctly,
did.
how did that book itself come about?
So it fundamentally came about because of my frustration with the public debate on science and religion.
Okay.
Right? If you look at science and religion as you see it in the public, what's interestingly is the two sides have the same starting point. Science and religion don't get along,
Mm.
and then they argue over your conclusion. Which do you pick, science or religion? And I found that either or structure just rather limiting and actually kind of frustrating. Um, I have to, full disclosure, I'm a practicing Catholic, but my mom's Jewish, so I have this interesting background. I've thought a lot about these, questions throughout my life, and never was it really a challenge to, science is about learning about reality. To me, faith is learning about reality. And they're different approaches. They ask slightly different questions, but ultimately they're asking the same basic questions. What can we learn about reality? And science has a methodology that lets you learn about physical reality. But I think most of human experience tells us there are things that go beyond that. If nothing else, for instance, there's math, right? Math goes beyond physical reality. So to me, the natural hypothesis is there's probably more. If there's probably more, what does it mean to be there?
Okay, I see. So there's definitely a connection between the two.
Yes.
That okay, awesome.
I do think, and one warning I give in my book,
Yeah.
I think both sides would be annoyed by my book, which is, I guess, a good place to be. But I do think what science does is it tells you certain views and ideas and um, certain types of God
Mhm.
probably don't make sense because they aren't consistent with what we learn about physical reality. And so I think that's one side that often atheists kind of get right, in my view, is
Mhm.
that the God they're talking about that they don't think you should believe in, I'm probably going to agree with them that a lot of the characteristics of that God don't make sense in our current world,
Gotcha.
right? God is a magical being that's constantly zapping and making things happen. It's hard to understand
It is. Yeah.
in a world of science. God is a concept of reality greater than just physical reality, not so much. And that's kind of what I try to explore in the book.
Okay. Well, I mean, you do see that there is something kind of divine in nature, right? You have the
Exactly.
golden ratio, for
Yep.
example, and how that's in nature, and that's pretty amazing
Yeah.
itself, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people that are, let's say, really devout,
Right.
Jewish, Christian, Catholic, Buddhist, maybe.
Right.
How do you, or how does one, or how do you actually go about, communicating with them about science, and how are you actually able to connect those dots for them to not necessarily sway them to a
Right.
certain belief, rather just say, hey, look, it's a marriage, it goes
Right.
together.
For me, the first starting point, always in any of these conversations, is understanding a person's fear. Like, why would you think science is in opposition to religion? And most of the time, for most people, it comes down to they've heard, it's as simple as what I said to me, they've heard they don't go together, right? Their faith is important to them. They're more willing to give up on a few aspects of science. And what the two big ones that I find fascinating are creation and evolution,
Mm.
right? There's actually no major faith that those are in conflict with because they're about the detail. If you want to start with God is creator and God made things happen, that doesn't tell you how God did things.
True.
Right. And that's the fundamental difference between these two stories. One is about how it may have been accomplished, and the other is what's the greater context in which it was accomplished. And the example I always give is baking chocolate chip cookies because I am a huge chocolate chip cookie fan,
As am I.
right?
Yeah.
And imagine being a kid and experiencing cookies going into the oven as raw dough, and, spherically shaped and coming out as flat cookies, right? That looks magical. And you can say the cookie creator made it.
Yeah.
Right? Or as you understand the science, you can understand the process of raw cookie dough becoming chocolate chip cookies in a detailed way. And just because I understand that process didn't remove mom from baking the cookies. So it's just a more complex story. And as you help people understand the connections, they feel at home with it. And in the end of the day, to me, it's a richer story.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that's pretty good
Yeah.
advice there, I think. To I guess it's kind of piggybacking on that because you're talking about more, I guess, more cosmic type stuff,
Right.
right? How is it, or do you see that a future such as where Star Wars, like a
Right.
Star Wars type future, right? Is that feasible in our lifetime, or is that something that is just in our imaginations?
Well, for the geeks in the audience, Star Wars was a long, long time ago.
Yes.
So it did happen a long, long time ago. And we're done with it. We're never getting back.
Yes.
No, exactly. No. But, I think, look, one of the reasons I went into physics was because of Star Wars, Star Trek, Isaac Asimov, the science fiction I read. Because I was convinced, and I still am, that space is our future. I have my non-scientific view of space travel and space exploration is if we don't ever figure it out, that's a heck of a lot of wasted space, and the universe doesn't work that way. No pun intended. But I just, and I think every time humans have felt something's impossible, it happens.
True.
Right? We do it. So I think the core elements of a Star Wars-like future are going to be real at some point. I also think I'm someone who part of what I study is non-equilibrium systems that are being driven by energy, which is what the Earth fundamentally is. The sun is heating us up, right? And there's a lot of general principles that go into that. We often think of life as happening by random chance. One thing I studied early in my career is heating fluids. And if you heat fluids, eventually there's a transition where they make nice organized convection rolls. This process is analogous to alien life in the universe in the following sense. If I just have a bucket of water, it's never spontaneously going to make these convection rolls. But if I heat it the right way, it does it with probability 1. And so, to me, what our existence on the Earth says is that in a non-equilibrium system being driven by a sun, the probability of intelligent life is actually closer to 1 than 0.
Gotcha.
If you think about it as random motion of molecules, yeah, it's 0. But that's not what we are. We're random motion of molecules with the sun heating us. And so I'm also very confident that there's life elsewhere in the universe. And so when you look at something like a Star Wars depiction, where there's this great variety of alien life, I expect that. Then people go, well, so much of it looks quite like us. Like, do you really, does that make sense? Again, when I take the analogy to the physics I do, when you look at pattern forming systems, in any given system, there's a limited number of options that occur as patterns, as choices when the system does this transition from nothing to a pattern. And so from that argument, you would also expect our general structure of bilateral symmetry and other types of forms might be what the physics tells you.
Okay.
And so the bigger picture of physics says to me, we're going to get there.
Gotcha.
Lightsabers worry me though. I really want a lightsaber, but I'm not sure how to make them.
I wish I had done a little bit more research on lightsabers
Yeah.
before I came here. But there is somebody who has been inventing where they can take the laser and it doesn't, because a lot of times lasers would shoot and
Right, yeah.
continuously.
Yeah.
Where they've got it to where it goes to a certain point and stops. But if you take 2 of those lasers, they just go through each other. Right.
So the problem with lightsabers as lasers is light. I mean, you can have a flashlight battle, right? And it doesn't work really well. But for me, what's great about the Star Wars technology as an underlying basis is whether it's the gun weaponry, the shields, or the lightsabers, I think, and I view them all as plasma-based, not light-based.
Okay.
And I don't know always the technical details of what the official Star Wars manuals say, but that's my interpretation of it. The reason that is interesting as a technology is we know how to magnetically confine highly charged particles that are plasmas. And once you're dealing with highly charged particles and magnetic fields, you have a lot of the properties that you see in Star Wars. Because by definition, if our lightsabers use magnetics to confine the plasma, those magnetics will probably work in a way that as you fight, they would repel each other. They would, if you're shooting a plasma beam at someone who has a lightsaber, again, the design of it could deflect the beam.
Gotcha.
Right? The challenge with the guns are probably easier to understand, except maybe the handheld ones, because the problem with any of these is the heat sinking.
Gotcha.
right? The energy required to make the plasma is going to generate a lot of heat, and so
So hold
weapon,
that.
yeah. So weaponry on a spaceship, you're kind of okay, right? Because you can imagine heat sinking it. Handheld gun, little trickier depending what you're doing with it, but you're firing individual little bursts, so maybe you can handle the heat. Long-term holding of the lightsaber, I think your hand melts. So
Gotcha.
that's
That
why the
makes sense.
lightsaber technology, from a physics point of view, runs into that. The heat is always the fundamental problem.
Okay, so if we can find a way in which we can, I don't know, somehow reduce the heat
Yeah,
almost instantaneously, then
or something. Yeah,
uh,
exactly. It's the heat flow problem.
okay, cool, awesome. So switch topics a little bit more
Yep.
here, since we're getting into that. Let's get into some comic book stuff
Sure.
because we have a lot of comic book fans here. You're a fan of Spider-Man, am I
Yes.
correct?
Very much so.
There's I don't want to get in too much of a debate on which is the better Spider-Mans, things
Right.
like that. But since we'll keep it in modern terms, in the past couple of years, what do you like the new Spider-Man, the Homecoming, the new one coming out? How he was in Infinity War? Did you see it?
Yes.
How do you like
So I
Spider-Man
actually
now?
really like the newest Spider-Man. So
Okay.
I think of it as right like three Spider-Mans, right?
Okay.
In the live action of my time, right? There was the first movies,
Sure.
there was the middle ones that I didn't really quite see all of because I was having trouble with, and then there's the new one. I think that captures all the movies. I really did like the latest Spider-Man. It was a lot of fun. One thing I liked about when they made him into movies, um, I know purists would get upset that we went from a radioactive spider to a genetically engineered spider,
Yes.
causing the problem. But the nice thing is, genetics is how you're going to get these superpowers, if at all, not really radiation. And that just showed our evolution and understanding of science.
Okay.
Right? At the early times when they were making these superheroes, they knew radiation could change things, and it's true, it can. Um, it does it in ways that often are a slower time scale, or would if you're making a change with the level of radiations that wouldn't kill the person, it's probably going to be something people would inherit, not something that would happen right away to you. Um, Most likely, the radiation would just kill you.
Gotcha.
Right. Most superheroes die before they get their superpower.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. With genetic engineering, however, it's a little weird because just because the spider was genetically engineered doesn't mean
It's
that
gonna
you would
alter the
alter
human.
you.
Yeah.
But what was good about that visualization is it treated it like a virus. And that is how you would genetically engineer someone. You would introduce a retrovirus that interacted with their DNA in very targeted ways. And you could do things like cause spider web. Now, I like the original Spider-Man where he built his web slingers. So again, I don't want to get harassed by purists. But from a genetic engineering point of view, that's not like totally out of whack that you could make spider, silk generating glands in a human. To genetically engineer so you have microfibers coming out of your fingers so you can climb better is again a bit extreme, but within the realm of possibility. So the genetic engineering piece was a nice addition, I thought, to the movies from a science point of view.
Okay, I've never heard that perspective before, so
Yeah.
that makes it a lot better in context and
Yes.
why it's more feasible. I
Yeah.
actually like that. So, that's awesome. I don't know if you play video games. I don't think so. You're very busy being a professor.
I do when
here.
I can, but
have you at least seen, or what do you think about the new Spider-Man game that just came out recently?
So I haven't had a chance to see that one yet, partly because my oldest daughter, who I vicariously live video games through, has moved back to Providence, Rhode Island. So I will probably get to see that when she's back home on vacation.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, the graphics on it is actually pretty amazing.
No, it's I've seen the ads for it and I've seen the video for it. I have to admit I'm always torn because again, I play occasionally. I mostly watch through my kids. I have this weird bias towards the Lego ones.
I can agree with you on
I
that.
just, there's something about having grown up playing with Legos, Lego Star Wars, Lego Batman. I've messed with the video games a little bit. And it's just fun. And I love the clicking noise as things fall apart and go together.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like those special effects.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you for that. Let's switch gears once more.
Yeah.
In a more, I don't know, more extreme kind of diving into physics with quantum computing.
Yes.
And how does that, or how will that change our daily lives going forward, do you think?
One of the biggest areas people are excited for, it has kind of a plus and minus, is security, right?
When you say that, people think Big Brother is going to be watching us.
Well, no, it helps in security, right? Quantum computing, well, it has a, so one way to think about it, what quantum computing fundamentally does, right now, all computers are based on ones and zeros. No matter how fast, supercomputer, whatever, all the electronics in the system can only either be in an on or off state.
Gotcha.
Okay, and it's all controlled by where electrons are, but or magnetic spins or different things. It can be done different ways, but it's fundamentally about ones and zeros, and that's why you have bits and bytes and all of that stuff. And we talk about binary and we make jokes in ones and zeros. Um, what that does, that puts sort of an ultimate limit on what a computer designed on that structure can do with really, really large numbers. So you can make ultra secure, um, basically security keys based on really, really large prime numbers. So you can take two really big prime numbers and multiply them and get another really big number. And no current computer really could find those two factors in any reasonable amount of time. And so you have a code that's basically unbreakable. Um, what happens in quantum computing is, so in quantum mechanics, systems are governed by a wave function. They can have many, many states, and you can put systems into quantum states of different types, and you actually can use more than just ones and zeros in doing your calculations.
Gotcha.
That changes the speed at which you do things and the nature at which you do things in fundamental ways that, for instance, make the prime number code no longer as secure. You can now imagine doing calculations you couldn't do before. However, you can now imagine totally new types of encryption using quantum encryption. So it's kind of a win and a lose, right? You lose a little bit of security in this space, but you win in using the quantum encryption and quantum security. So there'd be a fundamental shift in that once you had those, you're going to, particularly for things that you really want secure, like your information, bank transitions, money, it'll change how we do those, and we'll have to change pretty quickly because you can imagine an awkward transition period if a few people have access to quantum computers and nobody else does, and then they can get information. Um, I think for me, the other big question, right? We're very interested in artificial intelligence and whether computers will be conscious. Um, the brain is both slow and fast, right? It's a weird computer. It's really not like the computers we build in many ways. It's like it in some, but it's not based on ones and zeros, right? It's based on neurons using multiple ions, using concentrations that are continuous, not discrete. It's an analog machine, not a digital machine. Your neurons have all of these multiple connections, and the architecture is something we're only beginning to understand. So to get consciousness like us may not happen in a system that's fundamentally ones and zeros. It might not, right? Like we don't know enough yet about it.
So do you think AI can somehow mimic and replicate human neurons?
Well, so the question is for AI, if your fundamental underlying architecture is the ones and zeros that we have now, is there a fundamental limit on the programming you're putting onto that architecture? AI has gotten pretty good, but it'll never make that full transition to what we would consider consciousness like us because of the limit of the underlying architecture. Maybe not, right? Maybe it could. On the flip side, something that's based on quantum computing is going to look more like our brain from my perspective, because our brain is fundamentally electrons obeying quantum mechanics and doing stuff in a way that looks a little bit more like you would think a quantum computer would. So I think it's going to open up a whole new area in studying consciousness.
Wow.
In a way that our current computers couldn't.
Wow. That was a much deeper answer than I expected, but that's what we get from someone of your stature, so I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I don't want to take too much of your time. I know you've got students to tend to and all that and other things. So we'll wrap it up, but before I go, is there anything you'd like to tell our fans watching this, or maybe if your students watch this, is there anything you'd like to say before we go?
I think the number one thing, people often ask me as a physicist, why did I get involved in a lot of this pop culture stuff and other things? And my answer is, that's where so much of the creativity is. And I think people forget that science has always progressed because of the combination of careful experiment and incredible creativity, right? It's that creativity piece you can't leave out and you don't want to lose, and that sense of wonder. And that's, I think, what science fiction, fantasy, and this whole area always gives us, and a great place to play. I sort of feel like if we can imagine it, we should be able to build it.
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier because I heard once, and I'm not sure exactly where, but if you can imagine it, then obviously it's something that can come to fruition
Yeah.
because you can't imagine something that has not existed or could not exist.
Yeah, I sort of
Yeah.
feel that way. I mean, there's some things we say in physics, oh, can't go faster than the speed of light. We've proven that. But the nice thing is, we actually have some tricks around that.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, you can't do it this way, but you might be able to do it that way.
Gotcha. And that's what's great about physics. So.
It is.
Awesome. Well, thank you so
Okay,
much,
thank
Professor. I
you.
appreciate it. And with that being said, Geek Impulse fam, thank you so much for watching. And until we see you again, peace.